Your deck is rotting, your fence posts are leaning, and the green-tinted lumber you paid good money for at the hardware store is already splitting after 3 winters. Meanwhile, there are log cabins in New Jersey, still standing from 1638. Barns in Norway, built in 1150, that have never once been touched by a synthetic chemical. The men and women who built those structures didn't have pressure-treated lumber. They didn't have a home improvement store on every corner. What they had was something simpler, older, and almost completely forgotten. A handful of substances that worked with wood's own chemistry instead of against it. And the reason you don't know about them isn't because they stopped working. It's because someone figured out it was more profitable if you didn't. Walk into any lumber yard in America today and look at what they hand you for outdoor use. The boards have a faint greenish tinge. They smell vaguely chemical. The tag stapled to the end says ACQ, Alkaline Copper Quaternary, and the fine print tells you to wear gloves when handling it, wash your hands after cutting it, and never burn the scraps. That last warning should give you pause. When the leftover wood from your deck project is toxic to burn, something has gone very wrong somewhere in the chain between tree and timber. Now picture a different scene. It's the 1830s in the mountains of western North Carolina. A man is building a cabin. He has no chemical plant, no pressure vessel, no synthetic compound formulated in a laboratory. What he has is a pot of linseed oil, pressed from flax seeds growing in a field nearby. A batch of pine tar he rendered himself by slow-burning fat pine in a clay pit over 2 days, and a fire to char the ends of his fence posts before he drives them into the ground. He applies those substances with a rag and a brush. He works slowly and without urgency because he already knows the outcome. He reapplies every few years, the same way his father did. And when his grandchildren inherit that cabin, they inherit something their own grandchildren will still be able to stand inside. That is not a legend or a romanticized frontier fantasy. The C.A. Nothmagle Log House in Gibbstown, New Jersey, was built around 1638 by Finnish settlers using techniques nearly identical to what was just described. It is still standing today. Nearly 390 years later, it has never once been pressure treated with anything. So, what did they know that we've completely forgotten? And more importantly, why did we stop? Before we go any further, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever built a deck, put up a fence, or replaced a post that rotted out faster than it had any right to? Because what you're about to discover will completely change the way you see every piece of wood you've ever bought. Here's the part that should make you quietly furious. The modern wood treatment system wasn't built around making your lumber last longer. It was built around scale, around speed, around the industrial demand of the American railroad network, which needed tens of millions of preserved crossties every single year starting in the mid-1800s. In 1838, a British solicitor named John Bethel patented the full cell pressure treatment process, forcing coal tar creosote into wood using closed steel cylinders under pressure. By 1903, 27 pressure treating plants were operating across the United States, 13 of them owned directly by railroad companies. The system was never designed for the homeowner building a fence in his backyard. You just inherited the leftover infrastructure of that decision. And then it got worse. In 1933, an Indian timber scientist named Santi Kamizam developed a compound he called ASCU, combining arsenic, copper, and chromium, at the Forest Research Institute in Dehradun. By 1938, Bell Telephone had purchased the U.S. patent rights and began testing it on utility poles. Eventually, this compound became what the industry called chromated copper arsenate, CCA, the same green-tinted wood that went into virtually every residential deck, swing set, and picnic table in America for 60 years. The EPA finally forced a residential phase-out effective December 31, 2003, not because it worked poorly at preserving wood, but because researchers found arsenic leaching out of treated decks at levels that created measurable cancer risk for children playing on playground equipment. the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station measured arsenic in soil beneath CCA-treated decks at up to 350 milligrams per kilogram. The recommended safe limit for agricultural soil is 12. Stop and let that land. The wood under your children's swing set was shedding arsenic into the soil at nearly 30 times the safe limit. And the industry knew it. You're not broken. You weren't given bad information by accident. The system was built on trade-offs that were never disclosed to you, and the failure was never yours. Now, let's go back, because this is where it gets genuinely remarkable. Layer 1, the oil that turns wood into stone. Linseed oil, pressed from flax seeds, used continuously since the Middle Ages across Europe and colonial America, is not simply a wood coating. It is a chemical reaction waiting to happen inside the wood itself. Here is the precise mechanism. Linseed oil contains roughly 50 to 60% alpha-linolenic acid, a polyunsaturated fatty acid with 3 double bonds in its molecular chain. When that oil penetrates into wood fibers and is exposed to oxygen, something extraordinary begins. Oxygen molecules insert themselves into the carbon-hydrogen bonds adjacent to those double bonds, forming structures called hydroperoxides. Those hydroperoxides break apart into free radicals, highly reactive molecular fragments, and those radicals begin cross-linking neighboring fatty acid chains together into an expanding, three-dimensional polymer network. Think of it like this. You pour liquid into a sponge, and instead of staying liquid, it slowly hardens into a material that becomes part of the sponge itself. That is what linseed oil does inside wood cells. It doesn't sit on the surface. It becomes the wood, and once it polymerizes, it resists water, resists decay, and it doesn't crack or peel because it moves with the same natural flexibility as the wood fibers it's bonded to. Now here is where it gets even more interesting. Tung oil, extracted from the seeds of the tung tree and used in China since at least 500 BCE, outperforms linseed oil because of a single chemical quirk. Its dominant fatty acid, alpha-eliostearic acid, makes up 77 to 82% of the oil and has 3 conjugated double bonds rather than the isolated double bonds in linseed. That conjugation enables faster and more efficient cross-linking reactions, producing a tighter, harder polymer network that cures quicker and repels water more aggressively. Miha Humar and Boštjan Lizar at the University of Ljubljana confirmed in peer-reviewed research that tung oil outperformed linseed oil in every tested metric: fungal resistance, short-term water uptake, long-term water uptake, and outdoor field performance. Chinese craftsmen had understood this for 2,000 years before a European laboratory confirmed it. Historical craftsmen applied 3 to 5 thin coats, often warming the oil first to roughly 140 degrees Fahrenheit to reduce viscosity and drive it deeper into the grain. The Fairbanks House in Dedham, Massachusetts, built in 1637, the oldest surviving timber frame house in North America, was maintained with this exact approach for generations. The wood itself is still structurally sound nearly 400 years later. Modern exterior wood finishes do something superficially similar and fundamentally different. They sit on top. Film-forming stains and polyurethane coatings form a surface barrier that looks good for 2 or 3 seasons before UV radiation breaks down the polymer chains. The film cracks, water gets underneath, and now you have trapped moisture, accelerating the very decay the coating was supposed to prevent. The seal becomes a trap. One coat of properly applied oil, soaked in and polymerized inside the wood cells, does more lasting work than 3 coats of anything sold in a paint aisle today. And it never peels because there is no surface film to peel. If you're finding this genuinely useful, hit the like button right now. There are 2 more layers to this, and each one is more remarkable than the last. Layer 2. The tar that smells like the forest and kills everything that wants to eat your wood. Pine tar, rendered by slow pyrolysis, burning resinous pine in an oxygen-limited clay pit or kiln. At temperatures between 300 and 400 degrees Celsius, the result is a thick, dark, viscous liquid containing thousands of organic compounds, principally phenols, guaiacol, creosol, cresols, and resin acids. These phenolic compounds are antimicrobial weapons at the molecular level. They destroy microbial cell membranes by dissolving lipids, essentially liquefying the outer wall of the bacteria and fungi that cause wood rot. Resin acids layer bacteriostatic properties on top of that. Pine tar doesn't just resist moisture. It actively poisons every organism that causes biological wood decay, and it keeps doing it for decades. Think of the wood grain as a city. Linseed oil builds the walls and fills the streets with hardened material. Pine tar stations, armed soldiers at every corner who kill anything that tries to move in. North Carolina's colonial nickname, the Tar Heel State, comes directly from the scale at which settlers produced pine tar for exactly this purpose. The earliest recorded American wood preservative patent was issued in South Carolina in 1716, specifically for oil or spirit of tar. The classic Scandinavian application formula combined 50% boiled linseed oil, 25% pine tar, and 25% turpentine. The turpentine acted as a carrier solvent, pulling the heavier tar molecules deep into the wood grain before it evaporated and left the tar and oil behind. That three-part formula was not guesswork. It was the accumulated result of centuries of observation by people who built things they expected to outlast them. The proof of concept is standing in Norway right now. There are 28 surviving stave churches in Norway, built between roughly 1150 and 1350. Ørnes Stave Church, built around 1130, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has been continuously maintained with traditional pine tar for nearly 900 years. Not once has it needed to be torn down. Not once has it required pressure treatment. Researcher Inger Marie Eggenberg of the University of Stavanger earned her doctorate studying exactly this, documenting how periodic reapplication of pine tar every few decades sustains the phenolic barrier indefinitely. The forest doesn't stop trying to reclaim that wood. The tar just keeps winning. The modern industrial equivalent is coal tar creosote, which shares a name with wood tar in popular usage and almost nothing else in chemistry or safety profile. Coal tar creosote is a byproduct of coke production for the steel industry, containing polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons classified as probable human carcinogens. The American Creosote Works in Pensacola, Florida, which operated from 1902 to 1981, required over $35 million in environmental cleanup costs and left behind one of the most contaminated Superfund sites in the American South. Pine tar and coal tar creosote are not the same thing. They never were. Layer 3. The technique so simple it sounds like a myth, and so effective it has been validated by the USDA Forest Products Laboratory. Charring. You take a piece of wood and burn the outer surface with a controlled flame until a char layer 3 to 5 millimeters thick forms. Then you brush off the loose carbon, oil it, and you're done. This is the Japanese practice of yakisugi, also called shosugi-ban, documented continuously from the Edo period, beginning in 1603, but versions of this technique appear independently in Appalachian frontier traditions, in West African building practices, and across virtually every pre-industrial timber culture that had fire and wood in close proximity. When the same solution is discovered independently on multiple continents, that is not coincidence. That is empirical engineering arriving at the same correct answer. Here is exactly what happens when you char wood. When wood is heated to between 220 and 400 degrees Celsius, the hemicellulose in the wood cell walls, the complex sugars and starches that fungi require to metabolize and grow, breaks down and volatilizes away. It simply burns off. Cellulose partially degrades. What remains is a carbon-rich layer with residual lignin that is, from a biological standpoint, a nutritional desert. Fungi cannot metabolize carbon. Insects have no interest in char. Moisture absorption drops sharply because the porous cell structure that normally wicks water has been sealed by the carbonization process. Think of it as turning the outer surface of the wood into something chemically closer to charcoal than to lumber. And you cannot rot charcoal. The USDA Forest Products Laboratory tested 28 commercial shosugi-ban products in 2021. Their finding was nuanced in the most instructive possible way. Charring alone did not systematically improve durability across all samples, but Trevisan and colleagues demonstrated in subsequent research that combining charring with linseed oil or crude tall oil significantly improved fungal resistance beyond what either treatment achieved individually. In other words, the traditional Japanese practice of oiling the charred surface was the critical functional step that completed the chemistry. The char creates a hard, biologically hostile surface layer that eliminates the fungal food supply. The oil penetrates the wood beneath it and polymerizes inside the cells. Together, they create a two-layer, two-mechanism defense system that no single modern product on the market currently replicates. That is not a primitive folk technique. That is a sophisticated dual-mechanism protection system that the USDA's own researchers have confirmed in peer-reviewed literature, 4 centuries after Japanese carpenters figured it out by observation. Here's exactly why we abandoned all of this. The reason is not complicated, and it is not a conspiracy. It is something more mundane and more damaging than that. Speed. The old methods required time. You brushed on oil, you waited for it to penetrate fully, you applied a second coat, then a third. You maintained the surface every few years as part of the ongoing relationship between builder and structure. At the scale, the American railroad network was operating in the 1800s, consuming tens of millions of cross ties annually. Hand application was physically impossible. John Bethel's 1838 pressure treatment patent solved that problem in a single invention. You could load raw lumber into a sealed steel cylinder, flood it with preservative under pressure, and process thousands of ties in hours. Scale made hand treatment economically irrelevant overnight. Cost: linseed oil and pine tar required skilled labor, patient time, and deliberate craft knowledge passed between generations. An industrial coal tar, creosote, was a waste byproduct of coke production for the steel industry. It was being produced whether anyone wanted it for wood treatment or not, and it cost almost nothing relative to its effectiveness at industrial scale. The economics were not a close comparison. New infrastructure demand. The Rural Electrification Act of 1936 sent tens of millions of utility poles across the American countryside. Rural electrification jumped from 11% in 1935 to 90% by 1950. Every mile of new power line required treated poles. No network of craftsmen applying linseed oil with brushes was going to meet that demand. The hidden cost arrived decades later and is still accumulating. More than 600 current and former wood treating sites have been identified across the United States. More 63 are on the EPA's Superfund National Priorities List. Roughly 600,000 metric tons of arsenic sit locked in the current installed base of CCA-treated residential structures across America, in decks, fences, swing sets, and raised garden beds. The EPA canceled pentachlorophenol's registration in 2022, with final stocks running out in 2027 after nearly a century of use. The replacement preservative ACQ contains 96% more copper than CCA, which introduced a new problem. It aggressively corrodes metal fasteners on contact. Standard zinc-plated screws and nails show severe degradation in ACQ lumber. Builders now require stainless steel joist hangers that cost roughly 10 times their galvanized equivalents. The system replaced one set of hidden problems with another and charged you for both. So, what can you actually do right now? The easiest option is to find real linseed oil, not the commercial boiled linseed oil sold at hardware stores, which typically contains petroleum-based metallic dryers and solvents. Search specifically for raw linseed oil or cold-pressed linseed oil from specialty suppliers. Apply it warm, gently heated to around 120 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit in a double boiler, never over an open flame, with a natural bristle brush. Work it into the end grain especially, because end grain is where moisture enters wood fastest and decay begins. Let the first coat penetrate for 20 minutes, wipe off any surface excess, and allow 48 hours to cure before the second coat. 3 coats total. That treatment protects exterior wood for years at a cost of a few dollars per board. No subscription, no contractor. A no green tinge. The intermediate option is the classic Scandinavian three-part formula: 1 part pine tar, 2 parts boiled linseed oil, and 1 part turpentine or mineral spirits. Warm the mixture gently and apply it to clean, dry wood while still warm. The turpentine carries the heavy phenolic tar molecules deep into the grain before evaporating, leaving the tar and oil permanently behind. Food-grade pine tar is available from specialty woodworking and homesteading suppliers online. This formula has been protecting Scandinavian timber buildings for over 500 years. It will protect yours. The minimum option, the thing you can do before you spend a single dollar, is this: char the ground contact ends of your fence posts before you set them. A propane torch, 3 minutes per post. Burn the bottom 12 inches until you get a solid char layer. Let it cool completely. Wipe on whatever oil you have available and set the post. You will meaningfully extend the lifespan of that post in wet soil contact. That is the entire method. No laboratory, no pressure vessel, no subscription renewal in 3 years. The mountain men and frontier craftsmen who built structures still standing 4 centuries later were not working with crude methods waiting to be upgraded. They were engineers working with the finest materials available to them. And those materials happen to be alive, renewable, and chemically sophisticated in ways that modern science is only now fully quantifying. Researchers at the University of Ljubljana, the University of Eastern Finland, and the USDA Forest Products Laboratory are currently publishing peer-reviewed work that confirms what Appalachian cabin builders already understood in the 1700s. The knowledge was never lost. It was buried under a century of industrial infrastructure and the economic interests of an industry that had no financial reason to point you back toward a pot of oil and a brush. These men were not primitive. They were masters, engineers of wood, who understood that a structure's longevity was not determined in a factory, but in the relationship between builder, material, and time. The knowledge was never lost. It was just traded away. We're digging up the practical wisdom the industrial age left behind, the skills, the systems, and the materials that worked for generations before someone decided it was more profitable to sell you something that didn't. Subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next, and tell us in the comments what forgotten skill or material